Hey, there it is. It looks like we are on the air. Welcome, everybody at the Portland Metro East Community Media Center. We are broadcasting live to you tonight, Thursday, March 15th. I want to welcome our guest, Seahdom, Edmo.
Thank you.
Welcome. Now, you folks recognize that name because her dad, Ed, has been a guest a couple times on this show. He came on one time and did some storytelling, and then he came on and talked about Red Lodge. So it was two completely different visits by your dad. It was great to see two sides of him that way. Yeah.
His birthday's tomorrow.
Well, happy birthday, Ed.
Happy birthday.
Everybody get out there and pat him on the back tomorrow and say happy birthday to Ed Edmo. Well, before we get to our guest, I want to relate a little incident to our viewers. A memory came back that was hearkened by this book. It's called The Columbia by Stuart Holbrook. I actually got this autographed copy for $3 at the Portland Antique Show. And I opened it up to see what it said about the Cayuse Indians. Well, of course, almost any history book about the Cayuse relates the story of the Whitman incident. Some people call it a massacre. But a real interesting thing happened to me when I was about 22 years old. My sister Michelle and I were hanging out together in Pendleton, and we went out to my grandpa's house. My grandpa, Robert Red Elk, the son of Red Elk, who was a good friend of Chief Joseph. And we wanted to see Bob, Grandpa Bob, we called him. He had lost his wife, my grandma, years before, and he kind of lived an isolated life and I think he drank himself to death after his wife died, I must admit. But he wasn't drunk then. We came in to see him and we talked a little while, and then some guests arrived. And Winnie Burke, one of our most esteemed elders, was there with her husband. It wasn't Richard. Richard, I think. And they sat down. And we all said hi, and they sat down. And they didn't say a word. So here we were in total silence. They came in, everybody was in just content to sit in silence with each other. And my sister and I, it drove us nuts. After about 4 or 5 minutes, we were like, well, what do you want to do later? We just started talking among ourselves. And Winnie spoke up, and her first words were, I know what they teach you about the Whitmans in school, and I want to tell you what we know. Boy, did we perk up. She said, Whitman was always watched all the time. Everything he did, there was somebody watching him do it. And he was seen with a syringe injecting what Winnie called spores into the watermelons that he was growing in his garden. I guess the Cayuse were notorious for taking the watermelons because they grew from Mother Earth, and when they were ripe, they were harvestable. They were maintaining their traditions. To Whitman, they were stealing his watermelons.
Right.
And he put an emetic into this watermelon to where whoever ate it would vomit. And my sister and I are like, wow, we never heard anything like that about we'd heard about he was blamed for deaths of tribal members who he treated, and that was the shaman. We considered him a shaman, and he didn't deliver, so he was killed. That's not really the story that was passed down to my family. And what do you know? I opened up this book to see what they said about the Whitman incident, and this guy says that there were stories of Whitman putting emetics into his watermelons. And here, sure enough, that story that Winnie passed on to me 40 years ago, I got a second confirmation on it by Stuart Holbrook in this old book. It was 1956. This book is as old as I am. And it's the first time I've heard that a similar story about putting emetics, or emetic is something that causes you to vomit. And there's a lot of different things you could use. But it was confirmed in that book, and I wasn't surprised. I always knew from when he's telling me that it happened, but to see it and read it again, another account really confirmed to me that Whitman was not a nice guy. He may have been a Christian, and he may have was proselytizing among our people, but he was not acting on our behalf. He was acting on his behalf.
Mm-hmm.
So I just felt reassured that it wasn't some story that somebody made up somewhere by this incident, by Stuart Holbrook, who did some research and got that story and confirmed what I heard 40 years ago. So I just had to tell that story after my experience with the book. And thank you for suffering through that, Seahdom.
No, that's great. I mean, there are a lot of books that I see about, about Celilo, where I wonder where they got the information or who it came from, but a lot of the same things that I remember my dad, my grandfather, my grandmother, to a certain extent. I mean, I was 4 when she passed away, but still some of those things that they recall, some of the things I end up reading. And it's invaluable to see their words echoed on pages of, historical documents, or retold in books, that kind of even small pieces of confirmation of, things that you heard about how things were.
Yeah.
Because there is so little written from our perspective of that time, when there was such very intense racism happening, I hold on to those little pieces, and I pay attention to how our ancestors worded things. Like that, to me, even their resistance, their level of resistance, is to me very palpable through what they did and how they said things.
Mm-hmm. I'm lucky. My grandma did leave some writings behind. So we cherish the few pages we have of her writings from long ago. She was she co-authored our Constitution and bylaws of our
my
tribe.
Goodness.
Yeah, she was one of the leaders. So we really cherish anything that is on paper that she produced. Now, enough about me. We're here for Seahdom. Now, what is your tribal affiliation?
Well,
affiliations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, my dad's enrolled Shoshone-Bannock, but my grandmother, who was from Celilo, grew up, she's half Nez Perce and half Yakima. So her father, my grandmother, Rachel Cook, is, her father was Joseph Cook from Yakima, and then her mother was Priscilla Corbett from Nez Perce. So one of my only possessions from my great grandmother, my grandmother's mother, is the Book of Matthew translated into Nez Perce, and it says she wrote in it, in cursive, Priscilla Corbett, Celilo, Oregon, and that's one of the things that I cherish.
Do you know much of the language?
I don't. Yeah. Both my grandparents were in boarding school as young kids, and so they didn't, they
slapped out of them?
Yes, and I think they thought it was a protective factor to teach my dad and my uncle and their siblings to not speak the language.
Oh, that's what my grandma told my dad.
Mm.
You learn English. You're going to need English out there in this real big world.
Mm-hmm.
So just forget about your own language. Oh. Horrible that our people were put in that situation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's a good combination of tribes. Well, you're well represented in the Columbia Basin.
I know, yeah, exactly.
And where did you grow up?
I grew up here in Portland. Yeah, my
Okay.
dad moved away from Celilo. He was 11 years old when it was flooded and moved here to Portland.
It wasn't a relocation program, was it?
No, I mean they were relocated when the dam was built, when the dam was dropped.
Yeah, when the gates dropped.
And when the gates dropped, yeah. They went, so they weren't one of the 15 families who held out. They were moved to Wishram on the Washington side, so that's where he went to school, and later then went to the Dalles High School.
Mm. And you got your degree, right?
No.
No?
I've
degree?
never. I went to Oregon State.
Yay, Beavers!
I know. Yes, go Beavers. But no, I didn't. I didn't ever finish. Oh. I'm one of the.
Oh, okay. I just thought you did. I'm sorry. Did like a year or two, or what?
I mean,
Just
more
to
like
start?
3-ish, but
When
like
I first started, I dropped out after 4 months when I started college, so don't feel bad.
I know.
That's all the farther I made it.
I took some time off. I did AmeriCorps for the first couple of years after high
great.
school. It was the inaugural year of AmeriCorps, and so
What res were you on?
I wasn't. So I did the Northwest Service Academy, which was a team-based program here in the Northwest.
I didn't know that was
And
part of AmeriCorps.
yeah, they had. So they had AmeriCorps. Several different branches, but so I was in. There was environmental, public safety, public health. I can't remember, but you could apply through a different through varying, like, some of them were based in nonprofits, some of them were tribal. There was the Vista program, which was individual, right? So they had all kind of myriad of things you could do, and then they had the NCCC, the National Civilian Conservation Corps, which was did kind of larger team-based projects, but ours was a team-based program here. And then I then moved to Colorado and did a year, worked a little bit on setup of their program because they hadn't launched yet, because AmeriCorps was only in its second year, but it was with the Larimer County Youth Conservation and Service Corps. So, and then I came back and used some of that money to start at Oregon State.
Yeah.
And when I was there, I majored in environmental science and philosophy, and then I've taken classes here and there.
Good.
Mostly in the communication field.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, now you're working for Western States.
Correct. Yeah.
Tell us about what's your job duty, your title, and
Right.
what you do for them.
Yeah. Well, at Western State Center, I'm the movement building director.
Nice title.
I mean, I'm going
to have to change my title,
I
something
know.
like that. Librarian is too boring.
Yeah, it's fun.
Sounds like it.
But mainly my work though has been, even though I last year ran our biannual conference called AMP, Activists Mobilizing for Power. We had 500 social justice activists from all over the Western states and the country.
I wish I'd have been there.
Come learn about how to do the work that we do, how to leverage our power in our own communities. So that was amazing. But other than that, which was no small feat,
Sure.
it was most of my work centers around working with tribes and around issues of tribal sovereignty. So For example, working with nonprofits, folks in the foundation world, folks in government, even folks in business around, we've seen the sectors of the damaging impact of what happens when social, political, and economic power kind of create a cycle that keeps folks oppressed, that keeps tribes and tribal individuals in cycles of poverty, in cycles of violence, in cycles of incarceration, all of those things. But how do we leverage all of that, all of the capital that we have in each of those areas, and the power that we have in each of those areas to kind of move in a different direction, right? So begin to unthink some of the damaging processes of colonialism. So the work that I do really is in two kind of distinct groups. One is working with tribes on things like LGBT justice and connecting with progressive organizations and communities. And the other is working with those non-tribal communities about trying to understand how do they do their work in a way that either works to respect and uphold tribal sovereignty, right? Because nonprofits, foundations, they don't have an obligation to consult or confer with tribes,
not necessarily.
Right? So they almost see their missions as kind of like free reign, right? And that's another way of thinking about this land is my land, right? This territory is my territory. Yes, I define everything within, right? So all of this. So it's in a way, much of the progressive community has embraced ideals of settler colonialism, right? There's kind of a cultural amnesia about like what happened before. How did these foundations earn all their money that they now say are for
so
the
much they have to spend it because they pay taxes on it or something.
So it's working with that group of folks to really understand and see working with tribes and tribal people as a way, as a vehicle that propels them towards their mission and towards being a good citizen, good civic participants, good neighbors,
right.
Instead of seeing us as separate and apart. And I think that ends up happening for a lot of reasons, but one of them is because of the really effective nature of federal Indian policy to keep us either isolated or move us towards assimilation, right? And I think the byproducts of why we don't organize with other Black and brown communities is just an echo of how effective that was. Those policies were.
Yeah.
And so in many ways, when I come to a table, people are like, oh, we're not doing our job, we're so sorry. And I'm like, don't worry, I'm not here to yell at anyone. I'm not here to say, how dare you do this or that, and as may have been done before, but really...
let's move on.
My approach is like, how do we do, where are we at now? What do we know now around this table, and how do we get to our next adjacent possibility of coming together and being able to leverage all of our power? Because certainly I think that there are things that we have as that tribes have, like sovereignty, that could absolutely, I think, positively impact a lot of different movements. The environmental movement is one that certainly comes to mind.
Well, in the work I do for the Fish Commission, we were the enemies of the sport fishermen for years and years. The tribes, they did everything they could to eliminate the tribal fishery. Now, we attended the Sportsman Show here in North Portland a while back, and people would, thank you for the work you guys are doing. We have more fish because of the tribes, and if you didn't have treaty rights, I don't know what we do. That's right. Our treaty rights have been the main push to keep salmon in the Columbia Basin.
Right.
Otherwise, they would probably be gone by now. So it's good to see changes in that area. And that's what we need in the other, in larger institutions like universities, for instance. I want to know more about this publication, Tribal Equity Toolkit 3.0. So you've been working on it a while.
Yeah.
Tribal Resolutions and Codes to Support Two-Spirit and LGBTQ Justice in Indian Country.
Yeah. So we just published this actually last March on my dad's birthday. Thank you. it'll be out a year tomorrow. So it's incidentally it's free and available on our website, westernstatecenter.org, and
feel free to download.
And it's endorsed by, I think important points are, it's endorsed by not only us, we kind of facilitated a lot of the writing and review. I'm co-editor on it, but it's endorsed by the National Congress of American Indians, the Center for Native American Youth, at the Aspen Institute, and the Center for American Progress in Washington, D.C., and a lot of the major national gay, lesbian, and transgender rights organizations across the United States.
So do you guys collaborate or partner with those organizations as well?
Yeah. So
cool.
Right now, this is kind of part of a what we're hoping might be a national strategy outreaching to tribes, and something that I'm particularly interested in. I think for a long time, politically, we've always been kind of communities that vote more democratically than Republican, although we are oftentimes embedded in very rural, not progressive areas of the country. However, I also think we have a lot of power, right? So, for example, Confederate Tribes of Umatilla Indian Reservation is the biggest employer in their county, possibly even the Tri-County area, right? So there's a lot of power in that. So what happens when an entity, a sovereign nation as powerful as that, says, you know what, we're gonna change how we do things, and employees, here's your expectation of how you treat our tribal citizens and how we do business with the folks around us and communities.
Yeah, our contractors
need to say that they don't discriminate on the basis of gender identity or sexual orientation, right? How might that change the nature of business in rural communities? How might that shift the conversation, saying what we're doing here is enacting our traditional values, and you are agreeing to work with us, but it's important to us that you know what our values are when you either interact with our tribal citizens, if they're in a position as an employee to deliver services, or whether we're in a position where we're doing business with someone, that we be able to articulate why that's important.
Yeah.
And also for me, it's kind of a test of how might we envision tribes as rural progressive anchors for other social movements. I think the non-native society is always talking about the urban-rural divide, and talking about it in a way that seems to invisibilize tribal communities and tribal nations.
I hadn't thought of it that way, but
that we don't exist. But
you don't see reservations in population centers very often.
But if you look at some and kind of dial down into the actual, party by party votes, if you look at Montana, if you look at Wyoming, if you look at any of our western states, Washington, you see bright blue spots in the middle of a sea of red where reservation communities are. It's uncanny.
I'd like to see that chart, but I believe it. Yeah. I mean, I came out of a rural situation, and yet I left a lot of backwards thinking rednecks behind that are still stuck in the 50s, and now there's like this resurgence of those people under this administration. They feel empowered, and that's a whole other topic that maybe we could discuss. But before we do,
and I want to, yeah, I mean, I think we should.
Yeah, I want to talk about your book.
Yeah.
Tell us about American Indian identity.
Yeah, so published in 2016, so a year before this one.
Yeah.
I'm a co-author, so with Alan Parker and Jesse Young on this book, where we look at the concept of Indian identity from very different points of view. So they're both trained in law, trained attorneys, legal practitioners. Alan, of course, was the first in-house counsel on the Senate Committee for Indian Affairs. But in this book, he's really the voice of our elders, right? He's talking about what he wants to see the future of Indian country look like. In terms of Indian identity reform, and also really shifting the paradigm from tribal membership to nationhood and citizenship, and how that moves us from a conversation about race or ethnicity, right, where, like the kid in your class, to him, Indians existed and were defined by what was in his head.
Right.
Right. It's a concept.
Had to be brown skin, brown eyes, long black hair,
right,
straight. Then you are an Indian.
Right. It's a concept that it's not that Philip Deloria talks about in a lot of his writing and work, but that idea that Indians are fixed, right? I think there is a connection between Indianness and the fixed mindset, and what Indian is always existing in the past, looking a particular way, that white folks can come up to any Indian person and say, I think you're this much, or I can't tell you any Indian person I've ever met who does not have that story, right? Who doesn't have a story about being in kindergarten and having another white kid or a teacher, even worse, come up to them and say, well, you can't be full, or you can't be this, or you can't be that, right? And how does...
And, oh, you must be 132nd, right?
Right.
What?
Or how does... and further, taking that, kind of a step further, is that how does the racialization of our identity, so right, saying that Indianness is the same as race, how is the racialization of our identity undermining actually the rights of tribes to determine who is a citizen and who isn't? So like everything from, you'll notice that what it means to be Indian to Congress and the Supreme Court is a very different thing than than how the Census Bureau and the U.S. Department of Education define it, right? So those two definitions are not in alignment right now. And how does the box checking one actually undermine the rights? Because we can't just check a box and say that we're enrolled, right? That's not how that works. I propose in the book that that census and kind of popular way of doing Indian identity is not only is it undermining the rights of tribes to determine who is a citizen and who isn't, but it's also doing something much more insidious, which is teaching the public a different narrative about who tribes are and who tribal individuals are, right? It's kind of putting us in this mindset, or putting them in a mindset where they don't have to consider any other legal obligations they might have to tribal citizens or tribal nations, right? They're just, oh, you're a subgroup. And it's often how, ironically, I think individual like workers in federal and state agencies end up treating us as a user group. The smallest, not only a user
We're
group.
just an interested party.
The smallest user group. So you're only here sometimes, and we don't have to consider you. So I think that it's hard to tap into what that is sometimes, but I think there is a much more, you know, I said insidious, and really I think it is, tenor to that, and danger to continuing to use that definition of Indianness. And also, I think at the same time, confronting in our own tribal communities, right, the issues around what it means to be an Indian, a citizen, right, I've heard in the kitchen in a longhouse, somebody come up to me and say that I shouldn't have a say. Well, didn't say that I shouldn't have a say, but said, well, I'm full-blooded. And you can read into that statement, and I know what they meant. I'm sure they knew what they meant, but it's things that are done that are meant to harm. And
well, I like to remind people
yeah,
that we are defined legally as an entity or as a group, that we weren't defined by our race. Our relationship to the federal government and in the court of law is our legal status as natives, but we're not identified by our race in legal sense when we go to court. We are a nation. We may not get the treatment we deserve, but we have a special legal status that no other group has here in the United States. So that's kind of what sets us apart. That's kind of how I see the division from the outer community, is our legal status is so much different. There's a law for Indian people in these United States, and there's a law for everybody else in these United States. And we're just this one little group that gets this certain treatment. And a lot of people don't realize that that's the case.
it's true.
So, if somebody wants to get this book, where can they get it?
Yeah, they can get it on Amazon. They can get it from Powell's.
Powell's, a great place. Go to Powell's and look through the stacks while you're there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have anything in the works right now for your next? Are you writing anything that will be result in a publication?
I have some ideas, but nothing formal yet. But yeah.
Good.
I think we're looking at developing a similar kind of toolkit for economic development, so private enterprise development of Indian businesses.
Good.
So individually owned
Good idea.
businesses. So recognizing so again, when you think of the social, political, and economic power, and kind of building off of a lot of the work that Bob Miller has done. I don't know if he's ever been on the show.
Bob was on the show, and we promoted his book.
Okay, yeah. I love reservation capitalism, and
it's deep and takes a long time to read.
Yeah.
It was hard read.
Yeah, and I also like, like this toolkit, I like things that are aspirational and looking forward. So we know what economies that are built on the corporatization or of our tribal communities look like, right? We know what they feel like. But what do we want? What do we envision about our economies and how they'll support our tribal nations into the future? What kind of economies do we have? Do we need to have to kind of call into existence the kind of future that we want to see for our tribal people? So for me, it's way more than just a Buy Indian Act. It's setting right. That can't be the only thing, right? Just like we know that for Two-Spirit and LGBT folks, it's not just about marriage, right? It's about everything connected to family. It's about everything connected to almost every area of life. And likewise, where we get our money, where we spend our money, calls into existence the kind of future that we want to see, whether it's one that's built off of the exploitation of our natural resources, or the exploitation of our cultures, or the preservation of our cultures, and with it, kind of an economic system that is very much embedded in our cultural and traditional beliefs. And many times, I think you'll see tribal people gravitate towards those kinds of entrepreneurial efforts, right?
Yeah.
Ones that are very much in alignment with who they are. And
Like
so
fishing for salmon.
exactly.
Selling salmon.
Absolutely. And for, I think, a lot of those government agencies trying to encourage entrepreneurial development, it's not just about taking a piece of native clip art and putting it on your outreach materials and calling it culturally congruent, right?
Takes a little more than that.
Takes a little more than that. Takes a little more than that.
Oh,
So
geez. So there's some good policies in there, I'm sure. And you're trying to get the tribal equity toolkit out to all the reservations.
Yeah, so I mean, the National Congress of American Indians, who's a partner, has written 2 resolutions in support of this effort. So one standing in support of our Two-Spirit relatives, and then the next one, which has established a National Two-Spirit Task Force.
Oh.
So in those, and its design is essentially to respond to, just like all of their other committees or standing committees, respond to federal calls for comment on issues that pertain particularly to the Two-Spirit and LGBT community within tribal nations.
The feds are taking comments?
I mean, I don't know what they're doing with them, but they're
what was it? I heard 3,000 comments were lost in the sage grouse initiative that happened over in Montana just recently.
What?
They did a major sage grouse initiative and made all these decisions without the help of 3,000 of the people who gave them information about what they wanted to see. So I always wonder about when you testify or go to testify at a hearing.
Well, like anything at NCAI, I think it's twofold. It's not just speaking at the federal government or states. It's also speaking internally to our tribal communities about and with our communities in particular. I have found in working more closely with tribal folks in the West, particularly through the AT&I networks, is that there's a lot of will for wanting to do the right thing on behalf of our own tribal citizens, to keep our families together, to protect our children and elders, right, and to just be better relatives to one another. So there's a lot of, I think, inward personal desire that you don't sometimes always see. There isn't that, like, there wasn't, at least for me, when we started bringing up the issue through AT&I, kind of a visceral rejection of it, like you see in the non-native communities about, organized, like there wasn't really an organized right coming in and saying, no, we don't want this, don't include this, this isn't. There was essentially no opposition when NCAI introduced both their resolutions. They kind of flew through committee, and then just since, which I think is amazing, just since 2008, we've seen between 30 and 40 tribes across the nation just pass their marriage equality laws. But from my experience and having worked with, and now currently working with Quinault Indian Nation, Confederated Tribes of Siletz, Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs, Cowlitz Indian Nation, AT&I, and NARA, it's not just about marriage. It's about it's about access to the full spectrum of recovery services, right? And ensuring that all of the employees at NARA are trained. It's about
Healthcare
it's
services, providing
absolutely.
healthcare.
When we did a so that desire to always do the right thing is sometimes mistaken as like oh, we're all good feeling people, so we're just doing it, we don't need this, right? That was some of the reaction at first,
Yeah,
right?
like we're treating him
We're
just
reasonable
fine.
people,
So yeah, why
and
would we need this
why would we need
toolkit?
this? But so we did this interview project where I just went out and I said, I raised some money and I asked people outside of my network. I'm like, okay, so we're trying to do this interview project about, you know, grass tops tribal leaders across the Northwest. So elected tribal leaders, longtime high-level tribal employees, and cultural leaders talking about some of their own personal connection, kind of their cultural knowledge, and then policy knowledge about advancing two-spirit equality ordinances within tribal communities. And here's the most revealing thing that we found out through that process is that most of the heterosexual folks who are elected leaders or cultural leaders or longtime tribal employees saw that marriage was the only issue and didn't really see any other issues. The two-spirit leaders, who many of whom were elected and or cultural leaders in their tribes or had worked for their tribe for a very long time, saw it very differently.
I'm sure.
And that was really, you know, when you talk about strategies when you're creating policy and including the communities most impacted, that's who we should be listening to.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And their voice in these interviews, we went and reported back to the affiliated tribes of Northwest Indians, and it's exactly as you said, it's healthcare and it's just physical protection and family. Like those were you know, I think we're also not disconnected with the discourse of what's happening in the United States. And when marriage was struck down, there was big celebration, and yes, that's progress. But you know what? I think Celet's, who has been working on this for 8 years and doing really amazing work on behalf of their youth and on behalf of their tribal citizens. I mean, I've never seen a municipality pass, for example, like in any public building that they build, they have now a gender-neutral bathroom building code, right? Imagine if the city of Portland did that, or the state of Oregon said every public building now has to, if you build something new, it has to include gender-neutral bathrooms.
Inclusion rider.
Yeah. and exactly. And but
appropriate term for
you know,
the day.
A somewhat small tribe in the rural coastal area said, the future of our nation is important to us, and this is how we ensure that we demonstrate that we care about all of our tribal citizens. So again, you know, they have a marriage code. It's great. They have a, you know, dissolution of marriage code. That's great. But
now, do you have recommendations for that in here?
I do.
Marriage
yeah.
and divorce decree
All
stuff?
of this. So the way
Good.
that this is structured is, and I really encourage folks to read the best part, I think, of
Robert's.
is Robert Kenta's foreword. It is so inspiring.
Great.
But there's, and I would encourage folks, if they're working within their own tribal communities, to do advocacy work and kind of map out what that might look like, to start with non-discrimination and have other tribal priorities kind of flow from there. But begin there as a conversation starter. And I think a lot of tribes are very open to saying, yeah, We probably
We
shouldn't
should do
discriminate.
that.
Yeah, we probably shouldn't do that. And
Yeah.
but it depends on the tribe what their current priorities are, what they end up focusing on, and listening to the stories from other tribes. I think Silet's being a really great one to follow. Is that they didn't know where to start either, but they just started. And they started with very simple things like their intake forms for their social service programs. So instead of having boxes where they had sex, they just left it blank and said, write in your sex. And then on relationship status, they just have a blank box there.
Fill in your
relationship.
whatever.
Yeah, whatever it is. So you get to
Great.
define it. And I think, and I'm not sure about this, I'm going to have to check on this, but one thing that they want, a goal of theirs in the next year is to, I think a lot of folks here in Oregon are aware of the state law having a gender neutral marker for state ID cards and things.
Is that the non-binary?
Yeah, the non-binary
identity
right?
that I keep hearing. Yeah.
So Silet's is thinking about moving their enrollment that direction, which
Nice.
would be amazing.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
and
they're
I think
clearly
they
the
would
leaders
be. Yeah,
in
I think
this
they would be
thing.
the first tribe in the nation to do so. I'm not
Yeah.
sure,
Probably though.
but yeah,
Well, that's good to hear that they're such progressive people in the little town of Siletz, Oregon.
yeah.
The tiny town of Siletz. But how many tribes do you think you've taken this and shown and discussed with them? And how many years have you been working on this?
I've been working on it since 2010, this kind of initiative. And, it really just started because actually I was thinking about Umatilla. I was thinking about Umatilla, just and many tribes in Oregon who are those centers of economic, social, political thought, and are kind of thought leaders. I mean, I started thinking about like all the other amazing things I've seen the tribe do from the retro budget process to operationalizing within the natural resource department, like preservation and protection of our traditional foods.
First
right?
Foods program is great, and I think it's going to be adopted. So it's going to spread out from our tribe.
Most definitely. And this too I see as another thing that is really operationalizing our traditional values. Mm-hmm. And more than I think a lot of broader Indian law, I don't know whether to call movements in Indian law. I think that is the key. I think if a law or a movement is really connected to the kinds of futures we want to build as tribal nations, I think those ones will stick. And because everyone in multi, you can, whether you're young or you're old in a tribe, you can almost feel how it feels in alignment with who you are and where you want to see things to go, I think. And you can't really stop that kind of excitement when it gets going.
Yeah. Well, I'm proud of you, Seahdom, for getting this going and spreading the word. And when I was growing up, I had a stepbrother who, he must have been gay. He had never had any interest in women, and but he couldn't, under the pressures of society, he couldn't really come out or be gay because the backlash in Eastern Oregon, and tragically he committed suicide.
Oh, geez.
And I think part of it was because the social pressures that he felt, and he couldn't be the person he wanted to be, so he finally just gave up after years and years. He was 39 years old. So, and it was was before that incident that I had changed. I've been heterosexual and really didn't even consider what it was like to be gay or what people were like or how they even thought. I never even gave it a thought. But I'd started thinking about it. I met a gay man when I was 14. And he was one of the most talented and amazing people I've ever known in my life.
Right.
So that was my first impression of gay people. Here was an amazing man that was an actor and famous. You might know Will Geer. He was Grandpa on the Waltons. And he was the first gay man that I ever had met and knew that he was gay. And he impressed me. And it didn't have anything to do with his sexuality. It was him as a man. He did these amazing things, and just because he was gay, I mean, it opened my eyes and really grew to see that people will have different feelings. And if you're a man and you're not attracted to women, and you're attracted to men, and you can only love a man, what a struggle it must have been for my stepbrother to not be able to express that openly.
I think that's one of the things that I appreciate most about being involved with this movement is the kind of evolving learning that I get to have year after year. The year that we went to NCAI to talk about the resolution, standing in support of our Two-Spirit relatives, we had a session beforehand. The youth had requested that we come and talk about the toolkit, and so I was like, okay, I'll come talk about it. And at the very beginning, I did something that I had never done when I talked about the toolkit before, which was, because it was an all-Native audience, I asked everyone who had a friend or relative who was Two-Spirit that they cared about to just either rise or raise their hand or somehow indicate that that was the case. And the entire room stood up. And it just was so powerful to me to get out of the frame that I was in, right? So I myself was in this frame of articulating this as like rights for individuals and their families, right? And not understanding that really in the relational worldview, we're all a part of a Two-Spirit family. In our relational worldview, there's always someone in Indian country, whether a blood relative or a relative who's a friend who identifies as a Two-Spirit person. So realizing that that I had been all this time thinking about this in a way that was very practical, right? Legal, practical, but missing that cue, and what that was able to teach me about just, and also, it was the same shift that was happening in the LGBT rights movement, right? The moving away from the individual rights frame to a family and love frame, and it made sense. But for us, as tribal people, really understanding the power of the relational worldview frame.
Yeah. Well, all good topics. Thank you again for being here, Seahdom. Before we go, and we've only got about 4 or 5 minutes left in the show, I brought a couple books that I want to show you guys that, now you may not know that there's a Native American that won the Pulitzer Prize for his novel, Housemaid of Dawn, and that man is N. Scott Momaday. Scott Momaday is a big man. I met him, I was fortunate to meet him years ago, and after I did, I was determined to read something by Scott Momaday. And The Way to Rainy Mountain, Housemaid of Dawn, a great book. The Way to Rainy Mountain is one of his more recent books. And he talks, his narration is like from 3 different points of view as he goes through the book, he keeps giving these 3 points of view of these different issues and topics and stories. And it's really amazing how he put this book together. So you kind of have to read it and try and understand, make sure who's talking when, to make sure which character is behind that you're reading at the time. So please give Scott Momaday a read. Find The Way to Rainy Mountain or House Made of Dawn. You don't get the Pulitzer Prize unless you're a really good writer. So I really encourage you all to read Scott. He was a Kiowa tribal member, by the way. And in House Made of Dawn, he gives a lot of the old stories that he learned from his grandparents. So there's a real wealth of knowledge, family knowledge, in House Made of Dawn. And then The Way to Rainy Mountain is more of his experiment with literature to show just how you can put together the same 3 visions of the same thing, is kind of how he does it. So it's really, really an interesting read. In fact, I want you to read this here. This is your book.
Thank you.
Seahdom, yes, read
Thank
that
you so
and
much.
enjoy it.
That's great. Well, thanks for having me. This has been fun.
Yes, we have about a minute and a half or so. And we want to make sure, was there anything we didn't cover that you wanted to say tonight? Seahdom, can you think of anything?
I can't think of anything other than, if you're going to the Federal Bar Association's Indian Law Conference this year, I'll be there as one of the only non-attorneys.
Oh, yeah, and you're going to the Women of Color in the Bay Area in 2 weeks?
And just talking about the importance of supporting domestic violence and sexual violence survivors with economic development opportunities after they've gotten out of their situation. So yeah.
Well, we'll enjoy jetting all over the western United States.
Absolutely.
And I'm really glad you were able to come, Seahdom. And
Me too.
You did a great job sharing your material with us tonight. And I do hope to have your dad back on the show sometime.
Sounds good.
Yeah, he's a fun guest to have, and we'll want to hear some stories by him. So let your dad know that we'd like to have him back on the show. Put in a good word for us.
I will, definitely.
So to remind our viewers, we'll be back in 1 month. You can see tapes of this show we run before the next month's show. But thank you to Jim and Karma back behind the glass, and we'll see you all next month.